The 15th of June, 1944. Night over Kyushu Yawata's steelworks. A dull ember beneath scattered cloud. The warning sirens rasp first, then the distant throb low, layered, like an approaching storm. Second Lieutenant Sato grips the stick of his Ki 44, Tojo, the cockpit vibrating as he climbs through 9,000 meters. Below, the lattice of searchlights begins to stitch pale spears into the dark. Flak thumps in irregular bursts, black puffs hanging like bruises over the industrial sprawl. And then he sees it, no, not one, several vast silhouettes sliding through the moon-scrimmed sky, high and fast, the sound coalescing into a single, unbroken roar. B-29 Superfortress. The name has been a rumor on the home defense boards for weeks. Cho Teitoku, the Super Commander bomber. They were supposed to be beyond reach, beyond maps and logistics. Machines whispered about by maintenance sergeants and staff officers, but seldom seen. Yet here they are over northern Kyushu, engines steady, wings glinting. Even from a distance, Sato senses the difference. The scale is wrong, the confidence unsettling. These giants don't weave or jink the familiar way. They hold station, like patient warships at sea. Yawata, barrage on, barrage on. The radio snaps as ground control throws up a curtain. Sato thumbs his oxygen mask tighter, feels the ache in his calves, and shoves the throttle. His Tojo's Nakajima Ha 109 howls, the needles in the instrument panel shivering toward their red pins. He's briefed on the new tactic head-on: climb, fire, dive away. The B-29's central fire control system is rumored to be clever, its remote turrets slewing onto targets with ghostly precision. But the frontal collision course shortens the exposure. He lines up on the nearest shape, a checkered lamplight of tracer beads instantly stitching the air around him. The B-29's forward turret blinks. The sky fills with incandescent needles. Sato kicks left rudder, feels rounds pass so close the air itself seems to rip. He squeezes the trigger, Type 89 cannon spark, the Ki 44 judders, and a brief orange spark walks up the bomber's wing route before the giant slides past, indifferent, holding formation. The climb rate is brutal. Even the Tojo groans at this altitude. He yanks into a spiral, eyes tracking the behemoths as they level into their bomb run. On the ground, Yawata's Imperial Iron and Steel Works crouches in darkness. Then the first cluster falls, parachutes blooming, markers seeding, followed by the heavy droning pause of intent. For a second the city seems suspended, the entire island holding its breath. The bombs come in trains, their fall, a whistling geometry that lands with a body blow. A series of concussive booms rolling the night back on its heels. The distant river flashes white. The works compound wells up in sparks, and Sato's canopy blazes with reflections of a new sun as multiple impacts merge into one quaking roar. He dives, trying for a stern approach this time. Tailguns chitter from the B-29 twin, 50 seconds that rake his canopy in a scything arc. He drops through a gap in searchlights, the beam halo washing across his wings. For a heartbeat, the Tojo floats in perfect illumination, a moth in a cruel lantern. Fire licks up from a nearby flak burst, and the smell of cordite floods the cockpit. He levels, acts on instinct, and streaks across the bomber stream, firing short, vicious bursts, each stitched line vanishing against that impossible silver-gray hull. The radio is chaos. Some pilots swear they saw the giants cross from China. Others, more shaken, mutter about a new base east of the horizon, beyond their range maps, beyond assumptions. Ground control tries to anchor the panic. They staged from occupied China Chengdu area limited sorties. The words are meant to soothe. They don't. Sato finds a moment of clear air and watches. The bombers pivot, turning away in measured arcs that disregard the needle stabs of searchlights. They are already receding, the distance between their world and his widening with every second. He notes the discipline, no scattered panic, no stragglers sacrificed to the circling vultures. The B-29 seconds recede in a layered hum, the sort of sound that settles into a memory, like a cold weight. Back at the dispersal strip, he climbs from the cockpit, as dawn rinses the black from the horizon. The crew chief meets him in silence. In the distance, a column of smoke unspools above Yawata, a black ribbon that refuses to stop. They came from beyond the map, Sato says without meaning to. The chief nods once, eyes on the smoke. Behind them, maintenance crews lay out fresh ammunition belts with ritual precision, while an intelligence officer drags a finger across charts that suddenly feel too small. In briefing, the senior captain draws a circle around Kyushu and writes a name on the edge of the page. Chengdu. He taps another map. India, Burma. A set of improbable arrows converging on China. Operation Matterhorn, he says. A foreign word that tastes of hubris and altitude. He explains the logistics, how supplies must be flown over the hump, how each ton of fuel devoured several to deliver. The tactic will limit the raiders, he says. It should limit them. Yet Sato can't shake the mental picture of those silver hulls sliding across the night like sure-footed giants. That evening, a rumor runs along the barracks that one bomber fell into the sea and others limped away trailing smoke. The men repeat it with careful eagerness, polishing the tale until it gleams. Sato keeps his own counsel. He knows what he saw. Machine confidence, a kind of industrial poise. The B-29 seconds had not merely reached Japan. They had made the arrival feel inevitable. Before lights out, he steps outside. The night is clean and deceptively peaceful. From the north, the wind carries a faint tang of char. Somewhere over the dark ocean, those giants are still droning home, back to a base stepped across continents, a chain of metal and fuel and will. Sato looks up at the thin ribbon of cloud smearing the stars. Beyond the map, he repeats, and wonders how many maps will have to be redrawn before this ends. The map redrawn Saipan, Tinian, and the road to Tokyo. The 24th of November, 1944. Northfield, Saipan anvil clouds, stacked over the Philippine Sea. Captain Will Harper, aircraft commander of a B-29 from the 73rd Bomb Wing, watches crewmen yank the last chocks. 4 Wright R-3350 duplex cyclones cough into a ragged chorus, oil smoke trailing like charcoal smears across the morning. The runway is a white scar, bulldozed out of coral by Navy Seabees, who worked by floodlight and bulldozer in a constant, grinding ballet. Ahead of Harper's nose, the queue of Superfortresses seems endless silver hulls with shark mouths and pin-up girls and tidy stencils that say Musashino or Kawasaki on the mission board. XXI Bomber Command has been here only weeks, but the rhythm already feels older than memory. Brief, pre-flight, taxi, wait, listen to radios, and then the roll, long and heavy, like getting a ship underway. This is the first strike on Tokyo from the Marianas. The target is the Musashino aircraft engine works on the city's northwest fringe. General Haywood Possum Hansel has drilled into them the creed of daylight, high-altitude precision, Norden bomb sites, tight formations, a war decided by circular error, probable. Weather ships mutter good news and bad across the net. The jet stream, this new, unseen river of air, has been throwing bomb patterns like a magician's deck. But the order stands. Go high, go in daylight. Prove the doctrine. They thunder down the coral strip. Harper feels the weight fight him bombs, fuel, ammo, extra oil for those temperamental cyclones. The Superfortress lifts, skims the reef, and claws for height. Below, the Pacific dilates into a polished plate. Above, the sky is a hard, perfect blue that looks like it could cut you. In Tokyo, an air raid warden clacks a bamboo clapper at a Shitamachi intersection, 2 sharp notes that mean underground. Now, Lieutenant Sato, transferred north after the Kyushu attacks, stands watch at Atsugi. His new mount is a Ki-84 Hayate, fast, strong, a pilot's airplane when spares exist, and the fuel is pure. The phone rings in ops. A controller nods without expression. Radar plots sharpen like ink drying, and the duty officer murmurs what the staff had resisted for months. The Americans are coming from the southeast. From Saipan, perhaps Tinian. Sato sprints for his aircraft. As his engine warms, he looks east, nothing visible, just an intuition like a pressure change. The home defense net crackles with designations and vectors. He has flown against B-29 seconds from China. They came rarely, like long tides, and the army said the tides were receding. But Saipan and Tinian are different. Those names are not rumors. Those names have dates. Saipan fell July 9, Tinian August 1, Guam August 10. The enemy is no longer skipping stones across Asia. He has built a pier in the Central Pacific and tied 1,000 ships to it. Harper's navigator fixes the run with APQ-13 radar. The scope a ghostly city of blotches. At altitude, the wind is a living thing. A punch that shoves the Superfortress sideways even as the airspeed needle sits smugly. The bombardier calls the drift. The flight toggles tight. Steady, steady, he whispers, just loud enough to be heard over interphone. Below the cloud deck, Tokyo metastasizes outward tracks and lanes and channels and roofs, all wedged into the Kanto plain like puzzle pieces hammered together. They break out into cold sunlight, and the flak begins. Black punctuation marks bracketing the formation, each nearer clause more emphatic than the last. Sato sights his first B-29 just as the sun spills over its spine and makes a false halo. He feels the old awe again, the scale of the thing, then puts it away. Head on, then roll under, then a climbing stern pass if he lives long enough. He jabs the trigger. The Hayate's Ho 5 seconds cough 20 millimeters fire. The Superfortress flashes a rectangle of tracers, its remote turrets turning with unnatural calm, as if the airplane is thinking its own defense. He smells burnt cordite and a clean, strange scent alcohol, maybe bleeding from a punctured line. His canopy glass spritzes with something that freezes immediately in the slipstream, glittering like sugar. Bombs go. Harper feels the ship step lighter, then buck as the jet stream warps their pattern. He curses, then catches himself. The bombardier's already working the intervalometer, chasing the drift with adjustments learned from a week of briefings and a lifetime of instinct. Columns of smoke begin to bead the industrial district. A factory yard ripples. Rail lines disappear, under a rolling sigh that turns into a scream. Somewhere beneath them, men who have never seen a North American prairie, or a Chrysler assembly line, or a Kansas sky, are learning what American distance looks like when it's poured through steel. Back on Saipan, the Seabees are laying another pier, while Harper's squadron flies home. On Tinian North Field, surveyors have etched 4 parallel runways into coral, each long enough to let a wounded ship limp in and sit down like an old dog. Rows of Quonset huts shine dull in the sun. Jeeps kick up pale dust that smells like bleach and limes. Harbor cranes swing like metronomes over Liberty ships. Staging areas hatch crates of M69 incendiaries by the tens of thousands. Slim, hexagonal clusters, magnesium cores coiled with napalm gel, designed not to blast, but to burn and then burn again. Hansel believes in daylight precision, in breaking engines and bearings until production curves buckle. But the winds and the weather and the indifferent statistics of high-altitude attacks keep smearing his ballistic geometry into Rorschach. His intelligence officers bring photographs that look like charcoal drawings of almost hits. Incoming losses mount flak. Fighters, the R-3000, 350 seconds hot cylinder heads, catching fire at inopportune times. On the 20th of January 1945, Major General Curtis E. LeMay arrives to take command of XXI Bomber Command. Shorter speeches, harder eyes. He listens, then starts to move pieces. The crews feel the shift, like a change in barometric pressure. Cowl flaps rigged for cooler operations. Guns stripped to save weight on some ships. Altitudes lowered. Schedules adjusted to the enemy's weakness rather than the comfort of doctrine. Night missions considered. Incendiaries prioritized. The words hang in the ready rooms like a thunderhead. If they go low over Tokyo, they will go into a sky bright with their own fires. If they succeed, the brightness will belong to the war's ending. In Tokyo, Lieutenant Sato hears the same weather as tinny static in the radio hut. He rubs at the red mark his oxygen mask leaves on his cheek and notes the shortages avgas cut with something foul, spark plugs that die early, tires with sidewalls that split like old rope. He looks at a map filled with circles that represent climb rates and intercept windows, and he feels the circles shrinking. Beyond the map, he realizes, is not some far-off base in China. Beyond the map is a horizon that now passes through his own capital. Night of Fire Operation Meetinghouse. The 9th of March 1945. North Field. Tinian hot wind and diesel fumes under a star-pricked vault. Captain Will Harper signs for his load with a grease-penciled thumbprint. Clusters of M69 incendiaries stacked like dull honeycombs, plus a seasoning of M47 seconds and M50 seconds to prime the burn. Ground crewmen move with a quiet, hurried choreography, dollies rattling, winches whining, sweat dark on khaki backs. The briefing room still vibrates in his bones. Altitudes at 5,000, 7,000 feet, stripped guns and minimal armor were ordered, cowl flaps adjusted, lean mixtures for range. A night run, low, heavy, into a city built of wood and paper. General Curtis LeMay's directives were short as hammer blows. The jet stream had mocked high-altitude precision. Then the doctrine changed. Tonight, the 73rd, 313th, and 314th bomb wings will go in waves. Radar pathfinders, leading, aiming at the Shitamachi Tokyo's dense working-class districts east of the palace. If they do it right, the fires will meet and join. A chemistry not of explosives, but of oxygen and heat. Harper looks down the runway. Rows of Superfortresses in the half-light. Big-tailed silhouettes with open bomb bay doors. Fuel glinting on the coral like spilled stars. He pats the nose habit, not superstition, and climbs the ladder. Inside, the aluminum world hums. Navigator unfurling maps. Radio operator fine-tuning static. Flight engineer running his hand across the R3,350 gauges, like a piano player testing the keys. Interphone clicks alive. This is your aircraft commander. We're going to Tokyo. The takeoff roll is a continent long. The cyclones bellow, wheels lift, and the ocean yawns beneath them. Soon the stream settles into a black procession. Each B-29, a small planet with its own gravity and rules. On Harper's knee, a note from the intelligence officer. Enemy night fighter strength reduced. Flak heavy. Winds easterly at surface. He reads it, folds it, and feels a sliver of fear slot neatly into place. In Tokyo, Lieutenant Sato wakes to the clack of the warden's bamboo and the wail of sirens. The air is damp, wind coming in light from the east, the smell of the Sumida River riding it. He has slept in his flight suit on a cot near the dispersal. Shortages have turned pilots into mechanics and mechanics into magicians. The Ki-84's tank has been topped with a blend that stings the eyes. He jogs toward Ops, where a plotter's pencil draws a slow curve that begins somewhere beyond Iwo Jima, beyond even Saipan in the staff imagination, then slides straight for the city center. The first Pathfinder crosses the coast and drops nap of earth flares and markers tumbling. Tiny suns on parachutes, claiming intersections with methodical greed. On Harper's scope, APQ-13 paints the city as a green-white constellation. The bombardier calls the initial point, and Harper eases the yoke with 2 fingers, more felt than seen. They slip under the thin cloud, and suddenly the city is there in the dark grids and alleys and the black seam of a canal. Far below, a flare blossoms over a factory yard, and another makes a tiny lake of light on a tenement block. These are the pegs of a pattern they have practiced 100 times in chalk, and never once in this naked air. Bomb bays open. The cold rides up from the spine of the ship. Run steady, steady. Pickle. Clusters drop, arming spindles spinning, and the M69 seconds kiss rooftops like thrown seed. Each small cylinder punches through tile or shoji, hesitates, then pops with a magnesium bleat that licks and multiplies, napalm gel splashing honey-thick into stairwells, over tatami, into shelves of the paper that holds a life together. Fire units race their trucks down lanes that narrow into traps. Men form bucket lines that turn to steam. The first fires are discreet, 1,000 small arguments with oxygen. Then the wind joins the debate and suddenly speaks in a voice that makes the human scale ridiculous. Sato gets airborne into darkness that is no longer dark. The shitamachi glows at the edges, a corona forming. He hears the first reports, high over Koto Ward, many, and rolls toward them, a moth pushed by a tide. He passes above a square where police in white helmets shout into the roar, then loses the square when a line of roofs erupts and swallows his reference points. A B-29 silhouette crosses the face of the fire like a slow eclipse, and he banks to intercept. The Hayate shudders in the updraft of rising air. The cockpit, suddenly a warm room. He squeezes the trigger and sees his tracers vanish into convection so strong the rounds are bent by it. The bomber displays no panic, only a turn of a turret and the quiet arithmetic of return fire. Harper feels heat on his face through the plexiglass and realizes it's not imagination. The city is beginning to move, not just burn, but breathe. Rooflines glitter and go. Streets become bright. Rivers that run with something thicker than water. The flight engineer swears softly as the temperature needles creep. The bombardier looks once and then not again. "Close 'em up," Harper says. The doors thump. The ship gains a little dignity back. He noses left for the egress line. Past the palace's dark ellipse. Past the imperial moat that gleams black against the orange. Down in the wards, the fire finds itself. Small tongues join into sheets, sheets into walls, and the walls wheel into a storm. The wind that had been east takes the heat and turns it vertical. A column grows where the neighborhood used to be. Streetcars melt into their rails with graceful, slumping bows. Firemen fall back to lines they marked on maps that had never been measured in this currency. Civilians crouch in canals, only to discover that oxygen obeys different rules inside a firestorm. Those rules steal breath, then quiet, then everything. Sato dives for speed and finds emptiness where the air should be rising currents that seize the Hayate and tilt it as if a giant hand had brushed the wingtip. He levels with an oath and jukes away from a shimmering thicket of tracers. The radio offers prayer and arithmetic in equal measures. Sectors lost, altitudes reported, 1 kill claimed and then retracted. He thinks of Yawata months before, the shock of those first giants. Tonight is not shock. Tonight is a verdict read aloud. On the way out, Harper counts ships only by the blossoms of exhaust in the night. Some fly with a single engine rough, others with turrets dark, others steady as ordnances stamp into the logbook of the war. Behind them, Tokyo writes its own log, with light that can be seen 200 miles at sea, a pillar that makes new sailors shut their mouths and swallow hard. Losses come in on the return net, some to flak, a few to fighters, a few simply gone. The numbers hurt but do not halt. Back over Tinian, they land one by one, boots hitting coral, crews blinking at the stars, as if they've been reversed. In the debrief tent, Harper's pencil leaves a neat trail. IP good. Winds variable. Pattern achieved. Fires merged. He stops where the line for observed effect on target begins, and the words arrive without him thinking. Conflagration. Self-sustaining. By dawn the reports are staggering, square miles erased, casualties beyond reckoning, 1 million displaced. Sato walks out past a firebreak, where cherry trees still stand, leaves rimmed with soot like surviving saints. His city is not a map anymore. It is a negative, a shape cut from what used to be. He sets a hand on the trunk and feels the warmth stored in the wood. Somewhere to the south, he hears engines again. The war did not end in the night, but something did. and even the crows on the telephone wires seem to understand. The lifeline, Iwo Jima, and the long reach. The 4th of March 1945. Noon glare over a raw volcanic island, runways scored into black ash, like chalk on slate. A B-29 limps in with one prop windmilling and another coughing, the pilot's voice brittle on the radio. Low fuel. Gear unsafe. Declaring emergency. Marines in dusty utilities lean on bulldozer blades, then straighten, shading their eyes. The Superfortress wobbles, clears a berm by miracle, and kisses down in a squeal that peels rubber into lace. When the wheels stop, a crew chief climbs the ladder and meets a bombardier who looks as if he has forgotten how to stand on ground. Someone says the word Iwo out loud, testing it against the sound of the sea. Iwo Jima, taken yard by yard. Sulphur Island turned into a runway long enough to catch falling giants. By March 26, the island will be declared secured, though the fighting haunts the lava tubes for weeks after. The 7th Fighter Command drags glossy P-51Ds into fighter revetments stitched from pierced steel planking. Mechanics bleed their knuckles mounting drop tanks long enough to look like spears. On April 7, the first very long-range escort rises at dawn Mustangs from the 15th, 21st, and 506th Fighter Groups, lifting in ripples behind a tide of B-29 seconds. In the ready tent before takeoff, Lieutenant Joe Ramirez licks his thumb and rubs the edge of a small photo. Wife in a polka dot dress, baby he hasn't met. He bumps fists with his wingman and grins because that's what people do when the map suddenly includes everything. Captain Will Harper sees the escorts before he feels them. Bright crosses of contrails slashing into position off the left wing, fuselages that glitter like fish in a net. The radio clicks. Blue Ridge to lead, got you at your 3 o'clock, tucked. He hadn't known how much tension he carried until the Mustangs arrived, and the air felt, if not safe, at least inhabitable. Welcome to Tokyo, he says into the interphone, and the navigator laughs for the first time in days. Over Honshu, the weather is a jigsaw. LeMay's crews have burned Tokyo, then Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe nights when the horizon becomes a wound, and mornings when reconnaissance photos look like paper the rain has chewed. But today is daylight again, a strike coordinated with fighter sweeps and a net of deception missions. The Superfortresses' altitude sits lower than the old doctrine would prefer. The wind at their backs is no longer the jet stream's fist, only a shove. Harper can see the bend of the Sumida River and the black, waterless holes where neighborhoods used to be. He catches a glint silverfish again and realizes it's the Mustangs rolling over for a high-side pass. Lieutenant Sato scrambles from a makeshift strip near Chofu, boots slipping on grit. The Key 84's Ha-45 coughing, as if it too mistrusts the fuel. The briefing has become a petition. Conserve ammunition. Climb early. Attack head-on. Don't chase. He knows these words. He also knows something else. The American bombers are no longer alone. He levels at altitude, and the horizon resolves into a scene he has not trained. For B-29 seconds, bracketed by little predators, with scooped intakes and bubble canopies, each carrying two 110-gallon tanks that shine like mirrors. He says, Mustang, in English, across the interphone, because there is no time to translate it. Ramirez spots the Hayate high and frontal, a sliver that becomes a hawk on the stoop. He shoves the throttle, feels the Merlin lift him like a hand under the chest, and angles up across the bomber's nose so the turret gunners won't have to choose who to shoot. The P-51 snaps into a lead turn. The Japanese fighter flashes past, a dark green blade with the sunlight skipping along its spine. For a strangled instant, Ramirez sees the other pilot's face, the mouth, an intent line beneath the mask. Then the angles separate, and the sky opens again. The fight becomes a carousel high, descending arcs, sudden bursts that look short and turn out to be enough. The heavy, deliberate presence of the bomber stream, like a river you must cross and recross without ever touching. Somewhere beneath, rails buckle and the yards of Kawasaki or Hamamatsu erase themselves under tidy rows of stick incendiaries. Somewhere to the west, another B-29 group seeds the Shimonoseki Strait with mines under the codename Starvation, a quiet campaign that will, by summer, pinch Japan's sea arteries until ships sigh to a stop. Sato claws for a head-on pass at a straggler that isn't one Harper's ship, is feigning lag to let the escorts bite. The Hayate's guns sparkle. The bomber rocks, a neat hole appearing where a panel used to be. The dorsal turret answers with lines that cross and cross again. Sato dives through them and feels the world wash white. The cockpit momentarily snowed with shredded upholstery. He levels into a slot that looks safe and discovers it's the exact place Joe Ramirez has been waiting to draw him. A 3-second burst writes a short, persuasive sentence along the Ki 84's wing route. Sato's airplane remains an airplane, but it has forgotten some grammar. Below them, Iwo Jima waits like a black hand stretched into the ocean. For Harper and his crew, it is no longer a name on the map, but an option drawn in concrete and sweat. When the number 3 cyclone surges, they glance at each other and say nothing. The flight engineer leans to his gauges, the prop control sneaks left, and the vibration smooths as if soothed by touch. "We divert if it goes again," Harper says, and no one argues. You feel the island's gravity even at 4 miles up. Hours later, the Superfortress swings onto final at Iwo, with the Mustangs arcing overhead like shepherd dogs. Marines line the runway in the stance of men who have fought for every clod of it. They wave wands and cigarettes and hats. When the wheels kiss down, the crew lets out air they didn't know they'd been holding. A Navy doctor at the dispersal points at a ledger, already thick with names and tail numbers. Over 2,000 by season's end, he says, and the way he says it makes it sound like he is counting lives, not aircraft. Sato lands at Chofu with the Hayate trembling, and the main gear hot enough to tick like cooling kettles. He taxis past a line of mechanics with faces stretched thin and tools that look tired. The operations officer pulls a cigarette from behind his ear and stares at the sky as if squinting can subtract Mustangs from it. "New range," he mutters, and Sato realizes the phrase means more than miles. It means the bombers now own the air between bases and targets in a way that makes interception a geometry problem with fewer and fewer solutions. That night, in a Quonset hut, Harper writes a letter he cannot finish. Ramirez sits on a cot with the photo in his hand and laughs at a joke that isn't funny. On the other side of a newly drawn reach, Sato folds his flight gloves with the neatness of a ritual. The map under the lamp shows Iwo Jima as a red dot in a blue sea. But on the edges of the paper, someone has penciled in a phrase that wasn't there last month. Escort radius. The dot is not a dot anymore. It is a hinge. The net tightens fires, famine, and a sky that wouldn't empty. The 29th of May 1945. Osaka dawn, the color of ash water. Captain Will Harper rides the briefing's aftertaste back to his ship. Primary targets the munitions, districts, and port facilities. Secondary, the web of small works that feed them. The bulletin board outside intelligence has grown strange in its variety incendiaries. For tonight, high explosive for docks tomorrow. Parachute mines the next week for the Straits. He thumbs the mission sheet and sees a code name he has come to respect for its cold efficiency. Starvation. Down in the Marianas and out of Okinawa, B-29 seconds from 313th Wing have been sowing the Shimonoseki Strait and the Inland Sea. With Mark 25 and Mark 26 mines, their silk parachutes opening like night bloomers. Ships detour, then stop, then sink. The web tightens. They lift off in the dark and find Osaka by the way the coast glows where it shouldn't. At 7,000 feet, the Superfortress sits in a pocket of air that feels almost gentle. Harper slides onto the run and listens to the soft ceremony of the bombardier's cadence. Below, fire units lose themselves in a geometry made of wind. One row of tenements ignites, and a street that was meant to be a fire break becomes a flue. A single rail yard becomes a torch bright enough to write letters on the belly skin. When they turn for home, he looks south and sees Kyoto dark, spared so far, and he wonders, without saying so, whether mercy has a shape a pilot can recognize at altitude. Lieutenant Sato taxis out from Chofu, with his Hayate rattling at idle, like a drum too long in the sun. The operations officer's voice had been clipped. Conserve. Short bursts. Avoid pursuit. Fuel has become rumor. Spark plugs are currency. The aircraft boneyard behind the hangars looks like a museum of amputations. He rotates and climbs into a sky already lined with contrails and with something else. Emptiness. The gaps between the bomber boxes are policed by Mustangs with tanks under their arms, and behind the great stream, invisible but certain, waits the parachute minefield campaign that has turned coastal traffic into a ledger of losses. In the mess tent, officers have begun to say starvation under their breath, the way farmers say drought. On the inland sea at dusk, the mines work in silence. A freighter noses along a lane it believes is safe. A parachute under the water folds and unfolds according to a clock hidden in its heart. Pressure and magnetic fuses do their patient arithmetic. The explosion does not shout the way bombs do. It speaks like a verdict. In the harbors, cranes swing without loads. Ship hulls bow politely toward the mud. Coal piles shrink until they are words on paper. Sato sees the results from above the next morning, a line of berthed vessels that look unripe, a port that moves like an old man's hands. At a siding near Nagoya, tank cars sit like bitten seeds. The smell of the city's cooking fires has thinned. The smell of raw wood and damp ash has grown. LeMay's headquarters on Guam hums like an engine that never idles. In a Quonset hut, under an overworked fan, tactics move like chess pieces. Central fire control maintained or stripped. APQ-7 Eagle radar for some groups. Altitudes flexed. Takeoff slots space to feed a sky that cannot be allowed to go quiet. The casualty boards fill and are wiped clean and fill again. Between the boards hangs a map that shows arcs from Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and now Okinawa. On its margin, someone has penciled a sentence that started as a joke and became doctrine: no sanctuary. Harper's crew flies so often the days begin to rhyme. Engines. Check. Taxi. Wait. Roll. The Pacific opening like a held breath. Honshu raising itself into view, as if the island is pushing up from the water to meet them. They carry M47 seconds one day, and M69 seconds the next. They carry mines whose fuses ask only for patience. The return legs are full of sums. Cylinder head temperature versus mixture, drift versus fuel reserve, range versus the black comfort of that hinge island. Iwo. When a crew in their squadron goes missing, the gap at breakfast is small enough to step over, but big enough that no one does. Sato's squadron shrinks without ceremony. A pilot fails to return. His name is written in chalk on a board that is wiped clean at dusk because chalk is for futures. Another lands short and breaks a wing. The mechanics weep as if a brother has been maimed. They improvise. Ho 5 cannon barrels swapped like mismatched shoes. Magnetos cadged. Tires retreaded until the cords grin through. They fly at night more often now. And when they get close enough to see the bomber's skin, they observe strange absences. Missing guns. Where once there were many, bomb bays that open at altitudes that feel suicidal. A confidence that looks like stubbornness and turns out to be experience. In late June, a B-29 with the name painted modestly under the cockpit lands at Iwo Jima, blowing smoke like a defective carnival ride. The crew chief opens the bomb bay, and a set of fins glints there that the island doctor hasn't seen before. He notes it and says nothing. At the dispersal, Harper hears talk whispers folded into routine. A new device. A change in targets. Something that will make the phrase "beyond the map" mean not miles, but some other measure. He files it where pilots file things they can neither prove nor ignore. Food runs thin in Tokyo. Sato's sister writes letters that smell of smoke and starch, and in them she describes the new city without wood. Fire breaks like scars. Cisterns that hold nothing at all. Neighbors who bow more often and speak less. She mentions a rumor of a special attack force to be trained for home defense pilots, instructed to aim at bombers and never ask about landing fields. Sato touches the paper with the same 2 fingers he uses to touch the Hayate's panel before takeoff. He understands devotion. He finds he does not understand waste. On July 26, Harper sits in a briefing where the words, Potsdam Declaration, float like an undeciphered code. Surrender by unconditional terms, it says. Or else. In the ready room, someone asks what or else means. No one answers. And the fan turns, and the map of Honshu shows the same targets it showed yesterday. In the mess tent, a radio plays Swing with the volume low, and a crewman from another squadron hums in a way that makes the song sound like a lullaby for tired metal. That night over Kobe, the fires begin in neat, measured beads and end in something molten that has its own weather. Harper watches a column of heat punch through haze and make a tiny, vicious cloud. He thinks of Kansas and of the way thunderstorms stood up over the plains with no mountains to blame. He thinks of Sato without knowing his name, and wonders what it feels like beneath that, whether heat can have a taste. On the egress line, a Mustang tucks onto the wing and waggles, and Harper salutes inside the cockpit glass. At Chofu, Sato dismounts at midnight and feels the field's heat through his boots. He looks east and realizes he can tell where cities are now, not by lights, but by the lack of stars, dark disks carved from the sky. The operations officer folds a map carefully and says, "We are very nearly out of everything." Sato nods and thinks, "Except days." For the first time, he wonders if days can run out too. Beyond the map, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the silence after. The 6th of August, 1945. Northfield, Tinian sun high, and the sea a sheet of solder. Captain Will Harper stands on the perimeter road with a cup of coffee gone cold as a B-29, with an unusually spare look taxis away from a guarded stand. The nose art is absent. The tail is marked to look like another unit. The briefing this morning had routine targets for his wing. The hush surrounding the other ship is loud enough to hear. He watches the aircraft lift, climb, and point west, with 2 weather ships already far ahead and a photographic ship slated to follow. Someone near him says, softly, "Silver plate." The word clinks in the ear, like a spoon on enamel. Over Hiroshima a few hours later, people step into streets to look at the sky because the sirens have not sounded. A single bomber is not a raid. At Atsugi, Lieutenant Sato takes a maintenance report from a crew chief with ash in the lines on his face and then hears a scrap of radio that makes him stop walking. It is a fragment, no location, just a tone he has never heard. At 8:15, a device falls and becomes a sun. Harper does not fly that mission, but he hears it arrive. Not the blast, he is too far out over the Pacific, turning inbound to the home fields at the end of a routine strike, but the news carried in the voices of men who have run out of adjectives. The debrief on Tinian is a room where sentences begin and end without middle parts. 1 ship, single device, city, gone. On the wall, a colonel points with the back of a pencil at a map and taps the name of a city that used to be a place and is now an event. Outside, the palm fronds move as if in a small wind. The air smells of diesel and hot coral and, if you breathe shallowly, and then deeper again, something like ozone. Sato's unit hears a statement before it hears a name. The word "new" is used too often. The phrase "great damage" is used like a bandage that cannot possibly cover the wound. By evening, the name reaches them, Hiroshima, and the first rumors of a light that made shadows into fossils. He thinks of the fires he has flown above the way heat wrote columns in the air, and tries to scale that feeling upward to a light that erases, to heat that decides, In a barracks where the electricity fails at odd intervals, men sit on cots and do not smoke because the matches tremble. August 9. The morning is wet at Tinian. Rain making beads on aluminum that look like pearls on dull cloth. Harper's crew is chalked for a conventional strike when the operations officer steps in, then out, then back again, as if pushed by an indecisive tide. Another silverplate ship goes to the runway with its escort, the pre-flight done behind rope lines. Over Kyushu, clouds stack the way summer stacks in islands. At 11:02, the second device finds Nagasaki through a hole, in weather that might as well have been cut by a hand. On Guam, LeMay's staff answers when telephones ring. They answer again when the same telephones ring with the same callers who want to ask the same questions one more time. Yes, the reports are confirmed. Yes, the pictures will follow. Yes, the campaign continues. B-29 seconds fly that night, as they flew the night before. Mines drop into straits. Incendiaries find new grids. The net remains itself, even as some future unfurls beyond it. Harper adds a simple line to his debrief. Clouds heavy, flak moderate. Effects obscured. And then signs where he always signs. Above a typewritten, Harper, W. At Atsugi, Sato takes a bicycle into a part of the city where the firebreaks have made a new kind of park. The earth is damp. The cicadas louder than the thoughts he attempts to stack into order. He thinks of the phrase that has followed him all year beyond the map, and how it had meant China, then the Marianas, then Iwo Jima, and the Mustang's shadow on a B-29's wing. Now, as an officer tears a order sheet neatly in half and uses the blank side to make a requisition for spark plugs he knows will never arrive, Sato understands the phrase has broken free of geography. The Americans have thrown something from a distance that is not measured in miles, but in a new arithmetic of elements. The 15th of August 1945. Midday heat. A radio speaker in a mess hall that tastes of aluminum spoons. Harper stands with his crew as the voice comes through formal, precise, an emperor speaking of enduring the unendurable. Men who had joked about superstition earlier in the year remove caps without thinking. The air on Tinian holds still. Far away in Kansas, a mother stops hanging laundry and puts both hands on the basket rim as if steadying a boat. On the line, ground crews lay tools down and sit on crates, because that is the ritual for ending things made of metal. Sato hears the broadcast at Atsugi with his hands flat on his thighs. Outside, the field shimmers. Inside, a captain begins to cry without sound, and a sergeant writes 3 characters on a blackboard and then erases them one at a time. When it is done, Sato steps into sunlight and looks east. The sky is as empty as a bowl. He finds, to his confusion, that he does not trust it yet. The habit of watching for giants takes longer to surrender than an empire. In September, Harper banks over Tokyo Bay and sees white ships anchored like punctuation marks in a new grammar. His Superfortress circles, while dignitaries in dark coats sign their names aboard a battleship named for a state far from the sea. He checks his fuel and thinks about every map he has flown across and how each became too small. On final, he watches another B-29 flare and settle, and realizes he can almost hear the next thing starting. Transport runs, supply drops to POW camps, purple hearts in envelopes, the way a nation learns to fold its wings and still walk. Sato is assigned to an inventory of tools. The list reads like half a prayer. Spanners, bearing pullers, a fuel injector for a model that will never again arrive by crate. He cycles past a canal where the water has come back to its ordinary green and stops when he sees his reflection. He looks as he did last month and the month before, only the sky has changed. A child on the towpath points at the small airplane he has chalked on a wall. 2 circles, a rectangle, a tail, and says, "Ikoki" with delight. Sato laughs and bows. When he rises, he realizes the sound in his throat is not bitterness. It is a kind of astonishment. At a dispersal on Tinian, Harper kneels by the nose of his ship and presses his palm to the aluminum. warm now only because the sun says so. He thinks of the first night over Yawata, of the fires, of the mines descending into water like ideas that refuse to be seen, of Iwo Jima's poor black rock holding up the falling. He remembers the Mustangs arriving, and the way relief felt like a material that could be handled, rolled, cut. Most of all, he remembers the moment the campaign left the world of maps and entered the world of reach. Distance measured not in inches on paper, but in outcomes that rewrote whole countries. When he stands, the wind coming off the sea smells of salt and cordite fading into rust. The runway ahead is just a ribbon again. The sky above is only blue.